Hello and welcome to Apologetics 101 and welcome to the Genesis series. And today we're going to be doing a video on dinosaurs today with David Rives. That's right. He has a ministry based out of Nashville, but he's got a science center, Wonder Science Center, uh, in Dixon, Tennessee, and I plan on going there when we get our income tax return. So it's awesome. I can't wait. Uh, he's got some real fossils there, and I love to sit there and see them. Um, and uh, anyway, he's a television personality, and well, he has a whole ministry where he does a lot of content, including he writes books as well, and he's a television personality as well. So it's awesome to have David Rives on here. He's actually been to sites and been on excavations and digs and things like that, and it's so cool. I would love to be able to just to dive in to some of the experiences that he's had. He does deal with a little bit of that today, but I would love to dig deeper into some of the experiences he has on dinosaurs and doing excavations and stuff, and finding fossils like that. That's so cool. I think that's awesome. But he has done all that, so he's done some real science and things like that, and he's searched for dinosaur fossils, and he is a young Earth creationist. So this is an awesome video. We're going to be discussing dinosaurs today, whether dinosaurs live with man or not, were dinosaurs on the ark, things like that. So it's going to be my dinosaur video. um, and we're going to be, it's all about dinosaurs today. And so without further ado, let's dive in. All right. Welcome to Apologetics 101, everyone. And we're here today talking with David Rives from David Rives Ministry and someone from my own neck of the woods here because I live in Tennessee. So it's awesome to have you on here. I was actually born in Nashville, and that's where your ministry is based, correct?
That's right. We're just to the west of Nashville.
Awesome. Before we get into this, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your ministry? And if you want to, you can add a few plugs in there for your what you got going on. As far as I saw this morning a live, you have this live thing going on with the creation, and I thought that was pretty cool that you have that. But anyway, if you want to talk about that a little bit, that's fine.
Absolutely. Well, um, I'm David Rives. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I've lived in Tennessee nearly my entire life, ever since I was about 7 or 8 years old. Um, Always been interested in history, but experienced at a fairly early age. When I was about 16, I started taking photos of space, astrophotography, as a hobby. I would connect cameras to the back of telescopes and say, well, what if I could get a picture of this galaxy that I can see, a picture of this nebula that I can see? And again, at 16, it was a hobby. There's an art form to it. And after many long sleepless nights, I got the first pretty decent photo. It was of the Great Orion Nebula. My jaw hit the floor because I'd seen those kind of things in Sky and Telescope magazine. I'd seen those kind of things as Hubble space photography. And, I guess I'd always just told myself that must be doctored in some way. It can't be that beautiful. But the more photos that I took, the more I realized, wow, it really is that beautiful, that designed, that complex. And all of that beauty is pointing us to a designer, the God of the Bible. Well, that started a journey when I was about 18. I formed a nonprofit, a 501c3, and began telling people how the heavens declare the glory of God, how God's fingerprints are found in nearly every facet of our world today. All you have to do is keep your eyes open and don't be closed into this evolutionary dogma that has been pushed in on us, and you're going to see the design and the complexity around us. So I've hosted a TV show for many years. One is called Wonders Without Number. I got to the point where I was pretty sick of turning on the Discovery Channel or Animal Planet or National Geographic and finding out that it was 95% good science, factual information, but then they would put in just that 5%, and all of this happened over billions of years of evolution, you know? And I was like, why do you have to insert the evolutionary doctrine into everything that you do? Why couldn't we actually have information from a scientific perspective, which is always pointing us consistently back to the biblical record? So we formed the Genesis Science Network about 7 years ago, and it's been airing live 24/7 for about 7 years. Genesis Science Network, hundreds of thousands of people download our Roku apps and watch us on Roku, on our Fire TV apps. We're live 24/7 on YouTube and have been for many, many, many years on GenesisScienceNetwork.com, live 24/7. And not just the live play out of thousands of pieces of science content, but all from a biblical perspective. But we also go live from on location because I am filming this from the Wonder Center and Science Museum. We have our studios in-house. It is just outside of Nashville in Dixon, Tennessee. Image of it behind me here. We have this sphere over here is the #1 planetarium experience in America, top 10 planetarium in the world, and the rest of the museum is, well, it's over 100,000 square feet. So it makes it the largest science museum in Tennessee by far, and by far the largest science museum in the world from a creation perspective. We just opened a year ago, and that's called the Wonders Center and Science Museum in Dixon, Tennessee, wonderscenter.org. All of this to say, my entire life's pursuit has been researching different areas of science. I've led paleontological digs. I have led African photo safaris, taking 40 people who want to join me going through South Africa, looking at animal biology. I have been on 1 week speaking tours in British Columbia and Canada, 1 week speaking tours in Great Britain. I've been all around the world filming at different historical and scientific sites and pointing everything right back to the idea that when we get down to it, everything is pointing us right back to God's word.
Awesome. That is awesome. And me and my wife is actually planning on going to your thing on Nashville. And you said there's something in Dixon too. Me and my family, thanks to Dr. Georgia Purdom, who works for Answers in Genesis. I know that you know her. I saw that you had her on some things that you've done. And thanks to her, she actually treated my entire family to a Creation Museum and Art Encounter, and she basically hooked us up. It was really good. It was a
That is
pretty,
so great.
yes. But we went to the Creation Museum and the Art Encounter early this year, and it was a 5 hour drive away. Um, you think 5 hours wouldn't be that long, but it's very tiring, very strenuous journey. 5 hours up there, five
Absolutely.
hours back. And then, but my wife and me decided we want to do something closer, and we heard about what y'all did there, and I think my wife said she wanted to go there since she was 13. She said, and I told her earlier today, she said, you do know that the place that we're going to be going to on our next vacation, you do realize that I'm actually interviewing the guy that owns it. She's like, okay, you got to ask about it. Uh, how
It
much does
is
it cost?
definitely a destination.
How much does it cost on that on the pricing?
I think, um, my goodness, I'm not really into those details. I think it's $35 for adults. I think five or six and under is free. Um, yeah, but I think all the details are on wonderscenter.org.
Okay, and they got the Wonder Science Center in Dixon. Did you say
That's
that?
it. This is it.
That's it. That's it behind you. You're in Dixon right
This
now.
is the one.
Wow.
That's it. Yes, sir. That's our home base. Dixon is about 35 minutes west of Nashville, and so that's our home ministry base. So that's where we're located.
Oh, Dixon. So you don't have it in Nashville, or do you have one in Nashville too?
We're not downtown Nashville. No, we're actually in Dixon, Tennessee.
Wow. Okay. I thought it was in Nashville. So
No, there's a secular science museum in Nashville. Um, it's more of a children's museum, and while we have tons of kids' hands-on activities, I mean, we've had uh, student groups coming through all morning long, running around the museum, doing scavenger hunts and all of that. Um, we're kind of cross-generational. People from around 2 or 3 years old, all the way up to 102, 103 years old, can appreciate it. In fact,
yeah,
a little earlier today, we had guests from Greece, I think. We've had people from countries all around the world over the last few months since we opened.
you have real fossils there?
We do. A lot of museums that I've been to around the world, you'll see all of these fossils on display. Then you get up close to the plaque and it says facsimile or copy or cast, museum cast, or whatever it is. Replica, in other words. And yeah, we've got several massive replicas. We've got a 55-foot long Camarasaurus, long neck sauropod dinosaur that greets you as you're getting your tickets. That's a replica. We've got some of those big ones that are replicas, but then we also have mostly legitimate, real artifacts. I would say we flip the whole thing on its head. Usually, museums, you get about 70% replicas, about maybe 25, 30% the real deal. Well, we're probably about 70% actual, real fossils, whether it's the living fossils. I think we have 16 or more specimens of living fossils. We have manuscripts dating back to dating back 1,000 years old to the 1100s. Real Torah scrolls. We have real geological specimens, walls of it, fluorescent minerals, on and on and on. You could really spend days and never absorb all of it.
That's awesome. When I was at the Creation Museum, the one I loved going to the Creation Museum. I loved the Ark Encounter. It was a great experience. Have you been to both?
I have been to both, absolutely.
Awesome. But my
Yeah.
one disappointment was that they didn't have real fossils. I was expecting real fossils, and I didn't. And it wasn't real fossils. At least we don't think it was real. It didn't look
Yeah,
like.
they no, they have some real. They have some real, but a lot of it is cast. And those, again, they're friends of mine and they definitely have the displays are excellent, but some of them are definitely casts.
Right. Okay. Let's get into the questions. Okay. One of the most asked about question on dinosaurs. Does the Bible mention dinosaurs?
Yeah, that is by far the widest, most asked question that I get, that we get here at the museum. And the answer to that is almost definitely yes. Now, you won't find the Bible specifically saying this dinosaur or something like that. But what you will find are references to dinosaur-like creatures. So let me give you a couple of examples. In the book of Job, there is a creature called Behemoth. Now, traditionally, some people said Behemoth might be maybe an elephant or a hippopotamus because part of the description of behemoth says that he has a lot of strength in his belly. It says that his bones are like bars of iron. It says that he's chief among all of the beasts that the Lord has created. In other words, he's massive. All right. And so again, you would say, well, the largest thing that we know of today would be like your African elephant. So I guess maybe it was an African elephant. It's got big, strong bones, a lot of strength in its belly. It's a massive creature. But the Bible goes on to say in these passages that this particular creature um, actually moves its tail like a cedar tree. And so when we think about a creature that has a tail that it can move like a cedar tree, it doesn't match an elephant at all. It doesn't match a hippo at all. An elephant has a fly swatter tail, a little bitty tail. I lead photo safaris to South Africa. I've done memory games. I've worked with massive African elephants. I've ridden on their backs. I get up and close to them. There is no cedar tail on these types of creatures. So you have to say to yourself, well, maybe this creature doesn't exist. Maybe then the Bible is just a collection of fairy tales written by ancient goat herders, because that's what the atheists want us to believe. Um, to which I always reply, well, here's what we have to remember. Just because we don't see an animal alive today that matches whatever the Bible talks about, just because we can't find what the Bible is speaking of, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we haven't found it yet. Give science a few hundred years to catch on, and we will eventually discover that thing. Well, sure enough, as time passed up into the 17 and 1800s, and it really exploded in the mid 1800s, all of a sudden we started finding all of these fossils, these bones that are turned to stone scattered around the world. Some of them in places like Colorado and Missouri, some of them in places like Canada, some of them in places like China, some of them in places like Germany, some of them in places like Morocco. But the thing in common with all of these different types of creatures is that many of them are much larger than the creatures that we see today. In fact, in Argentina, creatures have been found called Dreadnoughtus, a titanosaurian sauropod creature that's over 100 feet long. It has a massive long neck. It has legs that are almost like elephants' legs. They're sauropods. But then its tail is this huge, long protrusion that it could have swayed just like a cedar tree. So, even though we don't see these types of creatures alive today that the Bible described in the book of Job, doesn't mean they don't exist. We're finding what appears to be these types of creatures in the fossil record. And then you have to say, well, what about the biblical implications? Well, paleontology has long suggested that those creatures found in stone were buried 66 plus million years ago. And yet, the Bible is talking about these creatures as having been made with mankind. In other words, God is talking to Job about these creatures, saying, hey, I made these creatures with you, right? Which means that they didn't exist 66 plus million years ago. They were buried much more recently in a catastrophic event. Now, I believe that catastrophic event is the flood of Noah's day. All right, so that's number one. There's another creature that's mentioned in Isaiah, it's mentioned in Job, it's mentioned in multiple books of the Bible, and it's called Leviathan. Now, sometimes Leviathan is kind of like possibly a code word for a demon, a Satan maybe. We don't know. But in some cases, when the Bible talks about Leviathan, it's talking about an actual creature. And then it goes on to give us clues. Now, when it talks about Leviathan, it says that it is a creature so fierce that none dare stir him up. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. It says that you can throw spears at him and it would just bounce right off, that this is some massive aquatic creature that you don't want to mess with. All right, so what could it be? Well, there are several clues. Now, dinosaurs are typically defined as land-dwelling creatures that walked upright on four legs. So Leviathan is not technically a dinosaur. It would be an aquatic type of a dinosaur-like thing, an aquatic reptile or an aquatic dragon. And there are several schools of thought on this. Now, I have friends and colleagues who have done a lot of research, and they suggest that it is very possible that Leviathan is Deinosuchus is a creature called Deinosuchus, which is a type of a super croc that was at least twice as large as our current day Nile crocodiles. Again, I lead African photo safaris. I take 40 people over there and point to Nile crocodiles floating in ponds and things, and they're big. But this thing, we found them in places like Oklahoma. We found them in places all over the world, and they were twice as big as the largest crocodiles that are alive today. So they were super crocs that lived in the water, and they were so fierce that you wouldn't dare stir them up. They had armor-like plating, so maybe a spear would bounce off. And it's very possible that that's what the Bible is referring to. The other possibility, so we've got the skull, a model of the skull of one of these things in the Wonder Center and Science Museum in the halls for paleontology. But the other possibility, and this one is something that I have personal experience with, I lead dinosaur digs to places like Kansas and take people, 40 children and adults out into the Niobrara Formation in the middle of the fields of Kansas, where in the cliff face you will find giant flippers and skulls of massive predators and backbones and vertebrae and teeth of these massive things called mosasaurs or tylosaurs. They're giant marine predators that could be 50, sometimes 60 feet long. They were deep sea predator sea dragons, serpents of the sea, dragons of the sea, so fierce that none dare stir them up. Again, matching the biblical descriptions that we find. So there are multiple models of this, but needless to say, it was a real creature, and it really did breathe fire. If the Bible says it could breathe fire, then it really did breathe fire. But again, we can only find the bones of these creatures today, so we don't know exactly the mechanisms in which all of this happened. Needless to say, the Bible mentions dragons, giant serpents, giant animals, behemoths, things like that, that are referring, more than likely, to what we now know today as dinosaurs. But the word dinosaur wasn't even invented until Sir Richard Owen said, well, maybe we should replace the word dragon in the 1800s, dragon, with dinosaurs to represent these fossils that we're finding. And dinosaur means terrible lizard, kind of like a dragon is a terrible lizard. It's the same thing, just with a different name.
Awesome. I see what you mean by vivid now. You answer several questions in just one. All right. With the Leviathan, like you said, the word dinosaur actually wasn't invented until like the 1800s. And so there are dragon legends like all over the world. But some people will try to reject or object with the idea that Leviathan can breathe fire because they think that this is biologically not possible. What would you say to someone who thinks that an animal cannot possess the right physical physiology to be able to breathe out fire? Is that possible?
When I go out and I speak and I share these stories of the mosasaurs, the tylosaurs that I've dug up, and that others have found, many times I'll give the description of Leviathan, a dragon so fierce that none dare stir him up. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Immediately, then, the skeptics in the room all light up and they say, aha, we've got you, because that's a fairy tale. Nothing breathes fire. I mean, that's just like a story, a fable. So the Bible is nothing but a collection of fables. How do you answer that? To which I say, well, here's what we have to remember. There is a creature still alive today in places like Texas, in places like, sometimes I find them crawling, or the false beetles in Tennessee, but there is something called a bombardier beetle. A bombardier beetle is this little beetle that can crawl around, and when it is attacked by, let's just say, a spider or some other type of an insect, it has a cannon in its backside. Now, the cannon wouldn't do any good without ammunition. All right. Well, guess what? This beetle has ammunition because there are two chemicals stored in two different chambers in its abdomen. And what it does is it shoots those two chemical components together, which starts a reaction, a chemical reaction taking place. It creates basically like this superheated steam that the cannon can use as ammunition to spray at this spider that is attacking it or whatever is coming after it. So if you look at these things at work, if you were to try to visualize this, and I have photography that friends of mine have done. I mentioned this in my second book that I wrote called 21 Verses Backed by Science, Deepen Your Faith. And then I also have video footage of this in a documentary, an award-winning documentary that I produced called, with the same name. It's called Bible Knows Best, 21 Verses Backed by Science. These beetles, when they spray and it hits whatever it hits, it is like this chemical reaction of all of this steam coming out. These beetles, might I add, are still alive, right? They're walking around our backyards here in America. So if something like that is still alive, that has cannons and ammunition of chemical warfare that they can shoot out, well, why are we surprised that some animal in the past had the ability to maybe one additional component? Maybe it had chemicals that could expel from its mouth, but it also had like a spark, an igniter or something that would set those chemicals on fire as it exited its mouth. Well, then you've got a fire-breathing dragon, right? It's well within the realm of possibility. And when you couple it with the fact that a lot of the fossils that we're finding have these chambers in their skull that we don't know exactly what those chambers were used for, maybe to hold these fire-breathing components. What that means is not only is it within the realm of possibility, it is very plausible. You say, we have these creatures alive today that can use chemical warfare. And then you say, we have one more thing even better. We have God's word. We have it written in an historical account that has stood the test of time, never been proven scientifically or historically or prophetically to be wrong. It's called the Bible, and it tells us that these creatures did indeed exist. Here's what I'm telling you. They did indeed exist. It's only a matter of time before we figure out all of the clues as to how it worked.
And then combine all that with dragon legends all over the world. Do you want to speak to that for a second?
All over this entire world, nearly every major culture that we have studied has a dragon legend. They have these massive creatures that people have fought, massive creatures that have terrorized the public, massive creatures that are not only part of their legends, not only part of their tapestries, not only part of carvings in their temples or in their literature, but more than that, these legends are so vivid when you read them that, yeah, I'm sure there's mythology involved. There are things that are made up, but all of the components can't all be made up. There is indeed something out there that people has seen, that we've seen in our lifetimes, right? In the lifespan of human history, of these giant animals. Way too far for us to discount all of these as mere mythology. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of cultures that drew these things, you've got the Chinese, you've got temples in Cambodia with carvings in rock, you've got St. George and the Dragon legends, tapestries all over the UK. Those things don't just show the bones of giant creatures like we find today. No, those have the creatures with the flesh still on them, which means that it is very likely that people saw these creatures. Sure, they might have made up a few things about them. Sure, they probably exaggerated, but you cannot discount the hundreds and hundreds of legends of dragons, dinosaurs, massive creatures that you find in nearly every culture. It all points back to these creatures actually existing, but you will find that the accounts written in the Bible are much more conservative, they're much more realistic than most of the legends you find in other cultures. Meaning that the Bible, if it really is what it claims to be, the inspired word of God, the Bible would be the accurate historical representation of what these giant dragons and dinosaurs were, behaved like, looked like. And then you've got the exaggerations of modern man.
Awesome. Um, is there any scientific evidence that supports the idea that dinosaurs and man had lived together? I know there's biblical evidence, and obviously, as creationists, we would believe that that dinosaurs and man had lived together. Dinosaurs were among the land animals. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, day 6 or 5. It's one of those days.
Dinosaurs would have been most dinosaurs would have been day 6 because they would
Days.
have been land animals, yes.
Yes. And so we know that there's biblical evidence of that. Is there scientific evidence, some scientific indicators that would indicate that man and dinosaur had lived together? A lot of evolutionists also think that dinosaurs didn't live together because they assume the geologic column and they say that, well, man and dinosaurs not found in the same strata layers and that sort of thing. So you can, if you want to, you can speak a little bit to that as well. But just kind of discuss what do you think on the idea of when it comes to science and dinosaurs and man living together with dinosaurs? Is there some kind of indication in the scientific evidence that favors the idea of man and dinosaur living together?
Yeah, when it comes to dinosaurs and mankind coexisting, there are multiple scientific evidences that will point towards that. First, let me go through a couple of sciences. Let's talk about geology for a second. When it comes to geology, um, most secular paleontologists look at the geological record and they'll say, well, you find dinosaurs down here, you find human remains up here, and so therefore there are millions of years distant. Um, no, therefore, most humans were buried after the dinosaurs. But the amount of time between those two is not given to us in the geological record. For instance, a friend, Dr. Tim Clary, has done a lot of geological research to pinpoint what the geological layers of the Earth. Yeah, it's a good friend. I've read the book cover to cover, carved in stone. I was talking to Tim couple of days ago, like 2 days ago. Um, he has been able to track cores all over the earth and rebuild the pre-flood continents as well as the post-flood configurations. And what this indicates, what geology indicates with oil well samples and core drills, is that dinosaurs and mankind didn't usually hang out right in the same areas, okay? So if you think of the pre-flood world, you would have had pre-flood seas, you would have had lowlands, you would have had highlands up higher on the continents, and probably in the swampy lowlands, you had more dinosaurs hanging out. Probably up on the continents, higher up, you had most of the humans hanging out. Well, what do we find when we look at the geological record, when we look at the geologic column, which is somewhat of a real thing? It's been exaggerated, but we do typically find things in somewhat of an order. Here's what we find. At the very bottom of the geological column, we find all sea creatures, things like trilobites, things like deep sea animals that have been preserved at the very bottom. Okay, fully functioning, fully formed, deep sea, complex animals, boom, preserved in stone. We go up a little bit and we find sea creatures like clams and bivalves and shells and things more on the pre-flood outskirts, right? We go up a little bit further in the lowlands, the swampy areas, and we start to find all of the dinosaur trackways, the ichnofossils. We find the dinosaurs themselves. We find amphibians. We find all of those kind of things. We go up a little bit further in the geologic column, and that's where we start to find small mammals and other than larger mammals and humans and things like that. All, by the way, completely buried and mixed in with more deep sea creatures from the bottom all the way to the top. But let's think about this for a second. If the biblical history is correct, and there really was a massive catastrophic flood of the world that then was, that perished underwater, well, the first thing that took place when the fountains of the great deep broke open and the windows of heaven were open is tremendous amounts of mud, sand, silts, and sediment start washing across the continents in tsunami-like waves. You know, the first thing that happens, though, they don't wash across the continents. They wash across the ocean basins, the ocean floors, burying the deep sea creatures. What are the first things we find in the geological column? Deep sea creatures. And then as the mud starts stacking up, filling up the ocean basins, then those muddy tsunami layers start to make their way onto land, onto the lowlands. They're burying dinosaurs in the death pose, uh, completely surrounded by mud and water, gasping for their last grasp of air before they are suffocated to death in that water, buried in the muddy water. And then as the muddy water continues to rise up, it starts to bury all of the land animals, all of the humans, all of those types of things. In other words, the exact order that we find in the geological column is the exact order we would expect to find if the biblical history is correct. So in geology, what we see is that it does appear that dinosaurs were buried along with mammals, humans, sea creatures, everything else, but in a muddy, sloshy mix, and they were buried just before the waters rose enough to get to all of the mammals and the humans. Exactly what we would expect based on the biblical historical record. That's geology. Then we move to archaeology and we go to temples in Cambodia, where in these temples there are carved into stone walls graphical representations of horses, of water buffaloes, of people, of stegosaurs. Of what? Of stegosaurs, that's right. Along with all of these other animals that these people in Cambodia were seeing, water oxen and horses and people and this and that and the other, they're carving representations that appear to be stegosaurs with the flesh still on them. Now, were they massive stegosaurs? Were there T-Rexes? Maybe not by then. Maybe they were all smaller, but it does appear that these people were seeing live, smaller dinosaurs still existing in Cambodia in modern day human history. Okay, that's archaeology. Now let's go to paleontology. I lead paleo digs in places like Kansas. I've been to Colorado. I've been to Texas. I've been to, well, all over the world looking at fossils. In Kansas, for instance, we have what's supposed to be 90 million year old creatures, and they're buried in this one formation called the Niobrara Formation. Well, in that exact same formation, I have found mummified wood, wood that will still burn when you ignite it. Now, here's a question, and here's what we have to consider. Will wood not fossilize? Will it not turn to stone after 90 million years? Remember, it's in the same layers as all of these other creatures, right? As all of these other fossils. Will wood not fossilize in 90 million years? I think that's kind of unlikely. I would think it would turn to stone. I think it would decay away or something after 90 million years. So then, if the wood is not 90 million years old, but instead only thousands of years old, and it's in the same layers as all of these other creatures that are supposedly 90 million years old, what does that mean? It means the rest of the creatures aren't 90 million years old either. In other words, all of these dinosaurs, all of these fossil remains were buried in the much more recent past, thousands of years ago, not 66 plus million years. Now, that's paleontology. Then we go to biology and chemistry. Dr. Mary Schweitzer published a study back in 2005 time period where a T-Rex was found in the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. This T-Rex, my good friend Kevin Anderson, I actually hosted and narrated Echoes of the Jurassic, the documentary, the award-winning documentary version of that book. And in that book and documentary series called Echoes of the Jurassic, we documented how T-Rex femur bones have been broken in half because they were too heavy to be transported with a helicopter out of the Hell Creek Formation. Broken in half, and when they were broken in half, they found soft material inside, which when rehydrated was stretchy blood vessels, osteocytes, proteins, collagens, still soft, stretchy material in a T-Rex femur bone. Massive T-Rex femur bone. In other words, it wasn't fully fossilized. We documented in that series, in Echoes of the Jurassic, we show you video evidence of a triceratops horn from the Hell Creek Formation in Montana, a triceratops horn that has gone through multiple freeze-thaw periods. In other words, it should have decayed away by now, but guess what? It still has soft, pliable material, original biomolecules inside of it. In the Wonder Center and Science Museum, we have models of Eryops megacephalus, the giant salamander-like creature that was 5 feet long. And then we show graphical representations, actual photos taken of pieces of Eryops that show intact collagen still existing inside these Eryops creatures. Eryops megacephalus, by the way, was supposed to have lived and died in the Texas Permian 300 million years ago. How long are we going to give it before these biomolecules decay away? Surely 1 million years and all of those biomolecules would have decayed away. No, here's what we're finding. They could not have lasted more than a few thousand years. And so that means that these supposed 300 million year old creatures are only thousands of years old. The 66 plus million year old dinosaurs are only a few thousand years old. The humans that we find are only a few thousand years old. The mammals that we find are only a few thousand years old. The mammoths that we find are only a few thousand years old. Everything within the fossil record, the trees that are still standing upright turned to stone are only a few thousand years old, catastrophically buried before they could fall over. And then the trees that I've been digging up in Kansas that you can still light on fire that are supposed to be 90 million years old are only a few thousand years old. In other words, everything within the fossil record is only a few thousand years old, which means that it was buried during the catastrophic global deluge of Noah's day, an actual, literal, historical account of a flood that wiped out and reshaped the earth, leaving us with clues in the fields of biology and chemistry, leaving us with clues in the fields of geology, leaving us clues within the fields of paleontology, and then leaving us clues within the fields of archaeology that mankind and dinosaurs existed only thousands of years ago, concurrently with each other.
Awesome. You need a bottle of water. Making
Yes,
my
I do.
mouth, you're making my mouth dry. I saw your video, or not the video for this book, but saw a video earlier where you were promoting this book, and I sat there, or promoting that video, and I sat there and said, "Wait a minute, that looks like a book I got." I said to go to my bookshop. I actually got this from the Creation Museum when we went to the Creation Museum this year. This was
Very
in
nice.
their bookstore.
That's
But
great.
I haven't read all of it, but it looks like it's really, really good. Some people have a response to the blood cells inside dinosaurs, don't they? They try to say that like maybe that's not really blood or something of that nature.
Yep.
Is it my understanding that they actually did do tests on that to determine that they were blood cells?
Yes. So on the common arguments against the soft tissue research are, well, it's contamination. Um, Maybe iron preservation can preserve intact biomolecules for millions of years. And then the other one is that it's simply not original biomolecules. All right, well, let's address those one by one. It's not original biomolecules. After 200 published secular reports of soft tissue in these dinosaur bones, 200 secular reports, I think that there's no question whatsoever. We're definitely dealing with original biomolecules. Uh, Objection number two, contamination. I would say that again, it's possible if we were only dealing with a couple of samples. Maybe the people who collected the samples weren't careful. Maybe the machines had things inside of it that would somehow trick the machines. But we're dealing with several hundred samples now from the secular reports, not from creationist reports. We're talking about secular reports. So it's hard to go with contamination. That leaves us to, let's just say, iron preservation or several other possible mechanisms. So our only mechanisms to explain this now are somehow soft tissues do indeed exist, and somehow they can survive for 66 plus million years. And that's where the mechanisms come in, like iron preservation. For that particular example, secular paleontologists said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a uh, uh, ostrich leg or cartilage or whatever you want to call it, and we're going to dunk ostrich cartilage in a glass of water, a vial of water. We're going to dunk ostrich cartilage in an iron-rich solution, and then we're going to heat them both up to try to simulate millions of years passing. Okay, now this is the scientific test that was done to try to explain how these soft tissues could last for millions of years. You dunk ostrich cartilage in water and in an iron-rich solution, and then you try to accelerate the decay using heat and things like that. Well, after a few months' time, you look at it and you take pictures of it, and the ostrich cartilage that's been sitting there in water looks pretty bad off. I mean, it's decaying really badly. And the ostrich cartilage that is in this iron solution is like, well, I could still see that. It's not decayed as badly. So therefore, I guess if there's enough iron present, you can get soft, stretchy blood vessels to last for 66 million years. That's the scientific tests that have been done to try to prove that soft tissue can last for millions of years. So now the three main objections are so ludicrous that anyone with an open mind, any intellectual who's willing to actually research it, can see beyond this and can say, yeah, there's really no mechanisms in which this works. We really have found hundreds of specimens of dinosaurs and other creatures, supposedly hundreds of millions of years old, with original biomolecules. There's no way to counteract that at this point.
Right. It kind of reminds me of that test and when they were trying to test for witches and back in the Salem, like if they drown, they must be not witches, but they die, and then if they float, then we burn them. So it's like, okay, that's not
Exactly.
exactly very
Yep.
scientific. But all right. Um, on my next question, then you covered blood cells. On blood cells, the woman who actually found this was an evolutionist. It was an old earther, and she actually turned to her assistant and she said that these look like blood cells, but how can blood cells survive 65 million years? So that's interesting. The one who found the blood cells in the T-Rex bone in the tissue recognized the fact that these can't last that long. So
Yeah.
because biological molecules
Dr.
break down over time.
Correct. Dr. Mary Schweitzer and her colleague, Dr. Jack Horner, um, who originally made these reports. Dr. Schweitzer, she knew that it was going to completely and radically rock the paleontological world. But she had the scientific, um, well, she had the professionalism to say, I'm going to stick with what our observations are, and I'm going to report these scientific facts that we're finding soft tissue. And she's like, I know that this goes in the face of everything that we know about dinosaurs and the age of dinosaurs and all of that. But hey, if we're not actually reporting what we discover, then are we being good scientists? Now, she was ridiculed and mocked for this, and they were like, "Nah, it must be contamination. You're giving creationists credence with this. They're going to have a field day with that." You have to applaud someone for saying, well, I just have to tell you what we're seeing, and what we're seeing are soft, stretchy blood vessels inside of this T-Rex bone. There's no way to get around it. And that's kind of exciting that all of the latest finds within paleontology, biology, chemistry, archaeology, all of these different fields are pointing us right back to biblical truth, to the idea that we can stand on God's word strongly from the first verse all the way to the end.
There is something I was going to ask you about. This something gets brought up a lot by skeptics. They know how we're going to respond, but for some reason they ask it anyhow. I was like, what about all these dinosaurs and creatures with sharp teeth, like saber-toothed tigers, and they got dinosaurs with like what they call meeting dinosaurs. They have sharp teeth and that sort of thing. And they say, well, see there, that means that they ate meat. Now, of course, according to the Bible, before the fall, we know that that's not, that was not even possible, because that would be death before sin, and death happened as a result of sin. That it was the consequence for us sinning, and as a result, and also we know that we weren't commanded to eat meat until following the flood and that sort of thing. So, how would you respond to someone who thinks that obviously they're trying to make an inference from the sharp teeth to them eating meat and ripping through meat, and then they argue that the flat teeth are good for uh, uh, chewing plant matter. How would you respond to that?
I have a very nice collection of kitchen knives in my kitchen right now. It's very curious that many times I will use knives with either serrations or dimples. There's this engineering technology, even if it's not a serrated knife. With particular types of Japanese knives, they put tiny little indentations or grooves all along the knife blade, which allows me to take a piece of fruit and to slice through that fruit very effectively without the fruit getting stuck to the knife. Okay. Well, guess what? A lot of sharp, pointy teeth might remind me of my sharp, pointy knives that I use to cut fruit all of the time. In other words, engineering built in for these creatures that maybe they weren't eating a bunch of leafy plants, maybe they were eating a bunch of fruits, berries, other things that would have benefited from these sharp, pointy teeth. Many creatures, even today, that have sharp, pointy teeth, don't use them to eat meat. They're vegetarian creatures. And so you have to ask, well, why then did they evolve with sharp, pointy teeth if these things evolved over millions of years? Obviously, it helps them with their diet. It helps them to scrounge around in the ground, to dig through patches of soil in order to do. There's so many different uses for teeth to be shaped in different ways for different purposes. And then the other thing that we have to remember, in addition to sharp, pointy teeth being used for vegetation or plants or fruits or things like that, the fall happened pretty early on. The Lord, in his infinite wisdom, would have known that after the introduction of sin, which happened pretty early on, animals would start to prey on each other. They would have started to eat each other. Not that it's a good thing, not that that's the way it was originally intended, but it is a consequence of sin. So it is very possible that the Lord in his infinite wisdom would have given creatures with teeth that would have allowed them dual purpose. It would have allowed them to consume a vast majority of whatever their diet might be. All in all, the idea of these creatures being designed to have the diet that they have is very, very plausible, and it fits with everything that we find within engineering concepts. Again, I'm just making one point between kitchen knives and the teeth of predators with, these sharp serrations, and other herbivores with teeth that have sharp serrations. Um, that engineering perspective, we could just push it further and further and further down the line to show that a grand engineer developed those teeth to basically a comprehensive diet of whatever they might need it for.
Mention animals that are alive today to have that. Like, for example, fruit bats, koala bears. Isn't that right? Or is it koala bears, I think?
Um,
Um, even,
Warthogs,
yeah,
yeah,
even bears are considered omnivorous. Um,
yes.
is it according to them, they think that flat teeth are required to be able to like our molars are flat,
Yeah.
like to try to chew up plant matter. But you don't actually need flat teeth because sharp teeth could actually work really good, but for things like nuts, berries, fruits, anything that or melons and things like that, anything that would take a little bit more force, or maybe even, like you said, a design feature that would be able to cut through them appropriately. So it's not you would see that probably as an assumption, like that someone has an assumption on the fossil record where they assume that having sharp teeth automatically means that it ate meat. That's not a guarantee. Is that correct?
It's not a guarantee. It's based on diet. We know that lions, during a period of history, lions in zoos, um, during time when food was scarce, uh, they would exist only on as an herbivore, only on non-meat diets, and those sharp teeth pretty well were able to tackle whatever was thrown at the lions until the food supply was reinstituted. So the versatility of teeth to tackle different types of diets is something that we have to remember here. I will say that elephants, absolutely, the elephants with those tiny, tiny little ridges all over their teeth are perfectly situated to grind and chew leaves and branches of trees. So those are perfect for their diet, right? But again, that doesn't mean that a combination of pointy and flat teeth can't be used for a variety of any combination of diet.
The question of the hour: were there dinosaurs on the ark? And of course, if there were, a lot of people try to throw out an objection. How could they possibly fit on the ark? Could you kind of speak to that?
I dig up dinosaur bones. I dig up massive marine creatures. I've dug up all sorts of fossils, probably thousands of fossils, in a very short life. I've been incredibly blessed. And what I've found is that the majority of creatures, even dinosaurs, are smaller. Now, the bigger ones are easier to find in the fossil record because guess what? If you're looking for a needle in a haystack or if you're looking for a log in a haystack, you're going to find the log first. So we always gravitate towards the big dinosaurs. But there are a lot of needles in the haystack. There are a ton of smaller dinosaurs, the size of sheep or cow or whatever representation, turkeys, whatever you want to give it, right? So I believe that 100% there were dinosaur type creatures on Noah's Ark. They were probably smaller dinosaur type creatures, maybe a few small theropods, a few small sauropods. They may have been very young because the young animals are much easier to take care of. They eat less and they have less waste to take care of, and they're much smaller, so you can actually keep them in more confined spaces. The ark was massive. The ark was very, very large, far large enough for small dinosaurs to go on, quite large enough for small dinosaurs to get off of the ark, to start to repopulate, probably suppressed when an ice age took place shortly after the flood. Many dinosaurs probably died off. They weren't as healthy in that colder environment. Some dinosaurs probably made it through until fairly modern times. I'm talking about medieval times, St. George and the Dragon type times. Um, but one way or the other, dinosaurs are nothing more than large lizards. And I do believe that large lizards got on the ark and got off the ark. They probably just didn't thrive as well as certain other types of animals in a post-flood environment.
Do you know how many kinds that would make? I know that they got like a ceratopsian kind. That's something that they actually discovered, that there's like a triceratops, biceratops, and a lot of creationists think there's like a ceratopsian kind. Um, how many kinds do you think it would have been? How many exactly?
There's there's a field, a growing field called baraminology, and baraminology looks at the baramine, the created kinds of organisms. That would be basic family types, but there's a lot of complexity within basic family types. We don't know exactly what the original created kinds would have looked like. We say, well, maybe if this creature can breed with this creature, perhaps it's part of the same kind, but it could be so much more complex than that. Um, we do know that you have theropod dinosaurs. Those would be like your T-Rex, your Deinonychus raptors, your Utah raptors, uh, Campiosaurus, things like that. They're three-toed, clawed dinosaurs. Um, those probably represented a kind. For all we know, from one of those families, you could get the smaller ones all the way to the great big T-Rexes, but we don't know for sure. When it comes to dinosaurs, it's incredibly hard to classify it. We would say that there's definitely a theropod kind, there's a sauropod kind. There are probably several designations of very specific types of each of those categories. But again, when you're looking at a couple of dozen, maybe a couple of dozen small dinosaurs getting on Noah's Ark, that's very, very doable. It's not every species. It's not millions of different species of dinosaurs. Today, paleontologists have this preponderance to every time I find a bone, I try to match it up with other dinosaur bones. And this is so exciting because you always want to be famous, right? So I'm like, I found a dinosaur bone. Does it match with this one? Oh, it's 99%, but there's this tiny little protrusion right here. So it must be a new species. I've discovered a new species, so I get to name it and I'm famous. Well, really, probably you just found a slightly mutated version of the dinosaur that everybody else has been finding, right? So you can't go by species when it comes to these things. You have to go by basic types or families or kinds of dinosaurs, which means that originally, when God created them in the beginning, it's probably just a few, and then they adapted into various ways to have your triceratops, your biceratops, different numbers of horns, but they're all really the same creature, just with adaptations and mutations.
All right. I was going to ask you about, because evolutionists think that dinosaurs, or at least certain dinosaurs, particularly theropods, evolved into birds. What is your response to that?
There's this huge push when you are going to university, when you're studying paleontology, when you're learning from the paleontological experts of the day, there's this huge push. You're going to be told. Now, this is almost laughable, but you're going to be told, yeah, dinosaurs never really went extinct. They actually just got smaller, sprouted feathers and wings, and flew off as modern day birds. So they really still exist, right? Now, again, I would laugh at that. Most people, if you were to push that fairy tale on them, they would laugh at it and they would say, that's ridiculous. Yeah, you're saying that the chicken is actually just a smaller T-Rex. Um, but it's being taught as fact in schools today. It's being taught as fact to the paleontology community that this is indeed what happens. The evidence is very slim. There are feather-like substances on certain fossils that are found. The question then goes to, well, these fossils that are found with these feather-like substances, are they dinosaurs? Or are they birds? Well, if they have feathers, they might actually be birds, right? If they don't have feathers, maybe they're classified as dinosaurs. Could there have been flying dinosaurs? Actually, flying dinosaurs defeats the entire purpose of the definition of dinosaur, which literally is defined as a land-dwelling animal. So the idea of feathered dinosaurs has taken the world by storm. Every museum you go through, 95% of the museums you go through today have started pasting feathers on their T-Rexes and on their Velociraptors and on their Deinonychus raptors and on their Utah raptors. And they pasted those feathers on models. They didn't find the feathers. They pasted feathers on copies of these dinosaurs. And then you're going to find a graphical representation in the sign just below that display case, and it's going to show this dinosaur. It's starting to grow more feathers, then it grows wings, and then it gets smaller, and then it flies off as this chicken, right? Um, as this bird, right? Well, again, we don't find those transitions within the fossil record. We don't find dinosaurs growing more feathers and then growing longer wings and then starting to get smaller and fly off. No, we find dinosaurs, we find birds, and we find these other types of fossils that some of them seem to have feathers, probably birds. And then we find these other types of dinosaurs that don't seem to have feathers, probably dinosaurs. So in other words, there are two distinct possibilities here. You've got a bird or a dinosaur. There is no transitional species to go from.
Right. Hey, David, are you familiar with cladistics? What evolutionists use?
Uh, I'll have I'll have to say not enough to intellectually speak on it in
Right.
the podcast.
Okay. That's fine. I'll just speak on it a little bit because I had an interview with Dr. Gabriella Haynes from Answers in Genesis, who is a paleontologist, a very brilliant paleontologist, who works for Answers in Genesis. She's done a lot of study on cladistics, and a lot of it comes down to how they're redefining these things, like they were redefine birds as dinosaurs, to redefine theropod dinosaurs as birds, to redefine the word feather is. Like they'll find like what was it that she said that they found like little hairs. I'm trying to think of the exact name of it. It's escaped my mind at the moment. But they would find these little hairs on like these little cylinder-like hairs on some of the dinosaurs, and because they think these evolved into feathers, they would then advertise that we found a feathered dinosaur, and it's not a feathered dinosaur. It's a dinosaur that some few hairs were found with, and that was it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, a lot of times soft tissues aren't preserved. Most of the time, soft tissues aren't preserved. It's rare instances where they are. And then occasionally you'll find skin impressions near dinosaurs or other types of fossils. And then occasionally, and very occasionally, you'll find, now sometimes you will find fakes made in China that try to show feathers being grown, but sometimes you'll find these wispy appendages, these tiny little wisps that may have been hairs. Again, we don't know exactly what they were, but they're used as evidence to try to support the idea that these dinosaurs are beginning to grow feathers, proto feathers, which then will make them turn into birds somehow. It's all magic. It's all fairy tale. It's time we dump the pseudoscience. It's time we get back to real scientific research and study, which is showing that there are clear differences between animal kinds and types, between families of animals, that every animal family appears very carefully crafted, engineered to perfection, designed to do what it does, designed with a complex genetic structure that enables it to adapt to its environment, but not for a chicken to turn into a hippopotamus, not for a giraffe to turn into a Nile crocodile, not for an ape to turn into a human. Those things have never been observed. Those are pseudo-scientific principles that are being pushed on our young people today in the public school system, in the universities, in biology class, every time we turn on television, in our kindergarten books. And it's time we start ditching the antiquated anti-science views of 150 years of Darwinian evolution, back when this racist man, Charles Darwin, believed that the cell was a simple bag of enzymes, nothing more than a little bag of meat instead of a complex city. And it's time we start pointing to what new science is pointing to, and that's the complexity and design of a grand designer, the God of the Bible, ultimately pointing back to the gospel message, to Jesus Christ, who lived, died, and was raised again so that we could be a part of his family for eternity. That is literally what everything is pointing to. That is literally what our entire ministry is about. And that is what good science has continued to support over thousands of years of research.
Awesome. That is absolutely correct. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have a couple more questions, if that's okay. Uh, okay, what about what killed the dinosaurs? Some people argue that a meteorite shattered, and they have evidence of this. What would you say? I think if I'm not mistaken, I think I might have seen some stuff where you talked about the extinction of the dinosaurs and that sort of thing. So how do you understand what killed off the dinosaurs versus what evolutionists claim they think killed off the dinosaurs?
It's very interesting that when you look at the extinction of dinosaurs, the sort of common parroted approach of traditional paleontology is, well, it must have been an asteroid strike. It was probably a meteorite or an asteroid that struck south of where we are right now, and it created this shock wave that basically started to bury all of the dinosaurs, created an extinction event. They'll point to the evidence for this as, well, we kind of see a crater down there within geological studies in the Gulf of Mexico, right, or down in that region. And then we also see a presence of iridium in some layers where we also find dinosaur specimens or ichnofossils of dinosaurs. So the iridium must have come from outer space. It must have come from a meteorite. Again, you got assumption after assumption after assumption after assumption. And in reality, what we're seeing is a worldwide event, not just a localized, some one big meteor strike, a worldwide event that started to bury these creatures underneath mounds and mounds of muddy sediments, more consistent with a global flood than with a meteor strike. So you've got two different schools of thought there. I would say far more consistent with what we're finding within the fossil record would be a muddy, watery catastrophe, not a single meteor strike.
Awesome. Okay, I got one final question, and I do thank you for your time. I appreciate the answers. You're being very comprehensive today. It's made my job a little easier. Uh, um, You think that dinosaurs can be strongly interpreted within a YEC paradigm as opposed to evolutionary one? You mentioned earlier about how children are being indoctrinated in this view of evolution and millions of years, and so it's gotten to the point where anytime an evolutionist say, "Hey, I got evidence for evolution. Look at the dinosaurs," it's like, "Okay, how's that evidence for evolution?" But the point is that they actually see that as evidence that things must have evolved over millions of years. So, but as a YC, as a young Earth creationist, as a biblical creationist, you can look at the dinosaurs and understand through and interpret it through a biblical view of history. And I was wondering if you wanted to speak a little bit about that today.
I may have addressed most of that. I will say, when we think about the evidence that we're finding in paleontology, the evidence within dinosaur findings, it seems to be far more consistent with the idea of a young Earth of recently buried dinosaurs. 4,000, 4,500 years ago, a catastrophic burial of the dinosaurs, as opposed to, and of all other creatures as well, as opposed to simply a meteorite catastrophe that locally happened and started an extinction event that took millions and millions of years, wiped out a portion of the world, and yet somehow many of them made it through because, hey, we've got evidence in the ostrich walking in Africa or the chicken crossing the backyard. They're really dinosaurs. Those kind of things, those kind of ideas that are being pushed are far less plausible, far less scientific. Might I say, almost like a fairy tale? The ideas about dinosaurs that are currently being pushed, if you were to phrase them ever so slightly differently, they could easily be found in any fairy tale that we read to our children before bedtime. This sort of supernatural idea that one animal turns into another, that all of these things just happened over millions of years of time. It's like, just yeah, given enough time, Mother Nature can accomplish anything. Magic takes place and turns this creature into another. It evolves the dinosaurs from their old state into an entirely different creature. Natural selection will simply take over, and all of these supernatural things will happen. Do you understand how magical evolution sounds? It only takes a few words to rephrase what is currently being taught in educational institutions to make the entire theories of evolution look like the pseudoscience that they really are.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that, thank you for coming in today and discussing it. I know we had a little bit of a late start, but that's okay. We've got through and you were very comprehensive and I do appreciate it. And I hope maybe I'll see you at when we come and visit up at the what's it called? Wonder
At the
Center?
Wonders Center and Science Museum in Dixon, Tennessee. You tell ticketing that you're here and that you want to say hello. And as long as I'm not traveling in the moment or on a speaking tour, I will definitely search you out and come down and say hello.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it very
Thanks,
much.
Brian.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye bye.
God bless. Thank you again for watching Apologetics 101, and thank you for watching this video on dinosaurs with David Rives. Uh, I found our interview very enlightening, very good. David was just like an encyclopedia of information. I would love to have him on again. He did a wonderful job in this discussion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to share this video with others. And of course, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe to my channel. I do all things Christian apologetics, particularly I've been on the biblical creationism subject matter and creation versus evolution discussion of late. And but I do lots of different things on Christian apologetics, and also not only subscribe to my channel, but like the video. Give the video a thumbs up. That will help YouTube get this information out to more people. And obviously share this content with others. Hit the notification bell. That's important for YouTube to try to alert you of all my future videos. And I've got another video that I'm fixing to edit that has to do with radiometric dating that I did just today with Dr. Andrew Snelling. And so I've got that video to upload soon. So I got this video and then I got the other video. And I will be uploading the other video as well. But this one will come out first. Don't forget to, like I said, give it a thumbs up, hit that notification bell, drop a comment below, and I will see you on the next one.